do have skills that make me a nightmare for people like you.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
That's a photograph of me. I was at a meeting and a woman came up to me and said, "You're not Roger Hayes." And obviously because I had the beard. And I assured her I was, and she took me at face value, as it were. But I grew the beard whilst I was in prison for 21 days. I lost a stone in weight as well. When I came out, my wife said I should go back in for another 20 days. I'll give you a bit of advice. If you ever don't pay your tax and you do go to prison, you should always declare that you're on hunger strike, because you get your own cell with an ensuite, okay? All right, moving on. Where's my screen? Okay, subject matter. Now, I'm going to tell you about the fact that mortgages are fraud. So I'm just going to revisit some of the issues that I feel are important. And I think the issue I was talking about the power of the state, just briefly. So I'm going to crunch my second part of the presentation a bit. So I'm going to talk quite quickly. So I'm going to first and foremost ask you to listen quite quickly. Before I go through that, I just want to ask a question. It's one of my favorite questions. How many people in this room have family and friends who think you're mad? And where are the sharp pencils in the box, okay? All right, back to the point, power of the state. My question is, when exactly did the state acquire power? They have authorities and duties. They're not supposed to have power, right? And I think the key point is that we need to get back to that position. Politicians now nonchalantly claim that they are elected into power. We hear all the time, don't we? They are not elected into power. They are not elected into power to rule us. They are elected into office to serve. And I think we need to start reminding people of that simple fact, okay? We've basically been subjugated, haven't we? And we are now, without a doubt, in service to the elite. That's the absolute reality of the situation. So what we ask our question is, what has actually happened? What's gone on? And so I have got this triangle. You're not up to speed if you don't have your own triangle. Okay? So I've got my own triangle. It's called a hierarchy of authority, and explains to people exactly what the authority is, or at least what it should be. The peak of the triangle is the rule of law, the law. We were all under the rule of law. And it doesn't matter what you call it, God's law, common law, the people's law, right? We know what the law is. It's what's right versus what's wrong. Now, it's not statutes. And a lot of the people in the legal profession will tell you that common law is made by judges. No, it is not. You show me a judge that makes law, and I will show you a tyrant. Okay? Common law is common sense. Brian? Common sense. Okay? So the bottom line is we have to get used to the reality that we are being given a lot of disinformation about the basic principles of just law. So what happens under the law? We then have the sovereign men and women. You and me are the next up. We are the sovereign people. And we, of course, are under the rule of law. All men and women are equal. There is nobody on this planet that can tell me to do without my consent. There is nobody on this planet that can tell you what to do lawfully without your consent. Never forget that. And unfortunately, that's part of the problem. Okay, we then have, in the hierarchy, we have what we call the people, the group, the nation state, society, community, you call it what you will. But it's a collection of all of us in society working together. And the point about this is it does not replace your sovereignty. It never will. You are involved in community on a voluntary basis. And what we then do as a group of people is we create a constitution, a set of rules and principles under which we agree to be governed. That's common sense, that's logic, isn't it? And the key point, of course, is it's for our benefit. We create the constitution so we all know what we're doing, so we can work in harmony and in peace with each other. Important point, it's subject to consent. In a society, in the nation state, in the community, the sovereign individual does work with other people subject to their consent. So moving forward, in our society, we determined that we're going to have a head of state. Now, in the United Kingdom, we have a queen as our head of state. In America, it's the president. Their job, fundamentally, is to make sure that the Constitution is protected on behalf of the people. They all serve under an oath of office. They have to rule, if you like, with constraint. And the constraint is our Constitution. We then are supposed to have democratic government, which comes under the Constitution and the rule of law. The government is not above the law. The government is not above the Constitution. The government governs according to the Constitution, the rules that we give them. And of course, all of the members of Parliament have an oath of office to Her Majesty the Queen. They swear an oath of office to Her Majesty the Queen, who obeys the Constitution and is under the rule of law. Again, it's pretty logical. But also, we must always remember this is being done with our consent. Then we have the institutions of government, and we start getting layer on layer on layer of people telling us what to do. And as that happens, what happens is this: we start to lose sight of the fact that they're all supposed to be doing this with our consent. And I can tell you that most of the people in authority do not realize, do not understand, or maybe do not want to know that they're supposed to be subject to the rule of consent. Now, I was arrested, and we were up in press. I've been arrested a few times. I don't make a career of it, but when you challenge authority, the first reaction they have is to sort of arrest you and throw you in prison. I was in Preston, and we were challenging the authority of the court for a good reason. We were arrested, and the policeman, handcuffed me and was dragging me off to the cell next door. And I said to him, "Why are you so angry?" And he said, "I'm not angry." I said, "Well, yes, you are." He said, "No, I'm not." Take him to the prison. Take him to the sergeant, and is that all right? Okay. Take him to the actual sergeant at the desk, and the sergeant at the desk said to me, "Name?" And I said, "I do not consent." And he said, "What?" I said, "I do not consent." He said, "You don't have to consent." I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "No, you don't." "What's your name?" "I do not consent." Penny dropped. So they put me in a cell for 2 hours. When I came out, and before that actually they put me in the cell, I had this briefcase with me. And in my briefcase I had my passport, my driving license, my statements, my bank statements, my credit cards, everything you could possibly wish to identify me. My passport with my photograph in. And despite that, they opened this briefcase up and they looked all of that. They still asked me my name, and I refused to give them my name. When they walked me into through the magistrate's court, handcuffed, they removed the handcuff, and the policeman said, "Get in the box." I said, "No." He said, "Well, sit there." I said, "No." Once the handcuff was off, I was straight across the stage, in front of the magistrates. Now, I've been held in a cell for 2 hours without water. In front of me were magistrates with their bowls, their jugs of water, and I said, "I want water brought to me in this court right now." And the legal advisor said, "You can get some outside." I said, "I want it brought to me in this court right now," and demanded water. At which point, the legal advisor said, "Get him out of here." Right? So they still didn't have my name. There were still no charges against me. The bottom line is I did not consent. When I got outside, the constable there said, "You can go now." I said, "Well, it's not as easy as that." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I have been held illegally in a prison cell for 2 hours, right? And I want to bring a claim or a charge against the magistrates and the legal advisor for orchestrating an illegal arrest and imprisonment." And the guy rolled his eyes and he said, "Oh, God." So he asked me to step outside, which I did. And I said, "Go back in and get the names of the magistrates and the legal advisors." He went back in and they wouldn't give him their names. I don't know whether they picked that up for me or not. But I then said, "How do I know they're not, skipping this out the back door?" And he said, "Trust me, they won't, because if they try, they will go to prison. We will arrest them." They held the magistrates and the legal advisors for 2 hours. in the magistrate's court. And they did that whilst they phoned around and found out whether they had to give me their names or not, right? And they actually do have to give you their names. They're supposed to give you names. If you're ever in the magistrate's court, ask them their names. It unnerves them. Who are you? How long have you been a magistrate? Give them the nth degree. Very important principle. The long and the short of it is that we eventually came away from that. That was a great learning curve for me. All right, moving on. Institutions of governance. Of course, we've got the courts, the judiciary, and the police. They're all subject to our consent. Never forget that. Including the armed forces. Because what happens is they all have to give an oath of office. That's the constraint on them. Unfortunately, they're all ignoring it. But you can remind them, you have an oath of office. I have to consent. You're subject to the Constitution and the rule of law. The more we remind these people, the more they pick it up. It's because of what we're doing on the internet that these guys are starting to get smart, okay? Underneath that, we have what we call the person. Okay, now the situation is, and this confuses a lot of people, if I started a company called Roger Hayes Limited, that's not me. That's a corporate identity, okay? It's a corporate entity. It's not me, the man. If you have Mr. Roger Hayes, likewise, that is a completely different entity. I'm the man, and the man is the sovereign man. When I enter into society and I consent, we create a legal fiction. We'll also be called a citizen or a subject, but nevertheless, it's still a legal person. If I sold my company, Roger Hayes Limited, to John Smith could trade as Roger Hayes Limited. It's quite legitimate. Right? And you must understand that Mr. Roger Hayes is not me, it's the persona or the legal person. It's also called the straw man and the legal fiction and the legal person. If you haven't seen the video, Meeting Your Straw Man, on YouTube, please go and watch it. It explains in detail. At the very bottom of the pyramid, we have outlaws. If you do not obey the law, and that's the law at the top, right, then you are an outlaw. An outlaw, if you do not respect the law, then you can't expect the law to protect you. It's as simple as that. Know and understand the law. Some very simple pointers. Laws protect, statutes control. We obey laws by compulsion because the law protects us. Statutes are subject to our consent. Watch this trick. Sometimes they build statutes on top of common law. So you think it's a statute. No, it's not. It has its origins in common law. Some statutes do not have their origins in common law. Laws apply equally to all of us. Nobody is above the law. Statutes can provide special privileges to certain groups. You park in a double yellow line, okay, and you'll get a ticket. How many police officers get tickets when parked in a double yellow line? So it's varied. You actually have to provide proof of your expenses. Members of Parliament don't, so that's the difference. Laws are fair, they are just, and they are equal. Statutes can be biased and oppressive. You can get fined for throwing an apple core in the street. That's oppressive, and it's not a law. Consent. These are 3 articles I've written. You can find them on the website, the bcgroup.org.uk. Have a read of those. It helps to explain lots of concepts. The consent, the most important word in the English language. Legal fiction, how they control us. And living by the rule of law, not the rule of statute. Okay. All right. How did we lose control of our rights? Simple. We fell asleep. Yeah. I think you and I all know that. We understand that concept. There's a phrase that a lot of people are familiar with. It's eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. It's attributed to Thomas Jefferson. It actually isn't his statement. That was in 1837. He actually picked it up from an Irishman and who wrote this in 1807. It's very poignant. The condition upon which God hath given liberty to man is eternal vigilance, which condition, if he break, servitude is at once the consequence of his crime and the punishment of his guilt. It's so right, isn't it? Yes? All right, moving on. This is the speech I was supposed to give you about the banking situation. Some background so you understand where I'm coming from. Over 40 years ago, I read this book. I was a young man, obviously very influential. But this was a book that actually described the blueprint for the creation of one world governance. It was written by Gary Allen, and in that time, I think it did a circulation of about 5 million copies. It's probably sold 10 times that back now. The point is that he wrote this book 10 years later, and it was completely ignored by the media. and yet it hit this massive circulation. He was warning about the creation of a one-world government. There is a global conspiracy, it's unquestionable, and that global conspiracy is trying to control all of us with the use of money, right? And it's the biggest crime against humanity, okay, that's ever been perpetrated against us. And present-day banking is a fraud, and it must be stopped. We know about this phrase, the love of money is the root of all evil. And of course, it is the underlying cause. The greed and the corruption is the underlying cause for the banking scam today. Main culprit, the Bank of England. The Bank of England is no friend of ours. The other culprit is the Federal Reserve Bank of America. Now, the Bank of England is supposedly in charge of our money supply. I was actually gobsmacked to find out this fact. The Bank of England does not keep a track of the amount of money in circulation. They do not keep a track of the amount of money in circulation. That is an incredible piece of information. And if you actually go online and try and find out how much money there is in circulation, you can't find out. Because it's so varied, different groups of people use different formulas. There's M1, there's M2, there's broad money, narrow money, top money, bottom money, there's all sorts of money, but there's no figure you can grasp as a total amount of circulation. Because if you could find out that figure, you could get a feel for how things were developing in the real world, as it were. So why don't they keep a control or monitor the amount of money in circulation? And the answer, of course, is that they don't issue the money. The Bank of England issues 3% of the money, which is the cash, except for quantitative easing, which is a special occasion. And therefore, because they don't issue the money, there is no monitoring and there is no control. The point about this, and it's a very important point, that if the Bank of England don't control the issuance of money, i.e. private banks do, and there's nobody monitoring it, then they can do virtually anything. They have the power to do what they want. Right, well, what's wrong with the bank? What's wrong with private enterprise issuing our money? And the answer is, of course, that it's being used for corruption. It's being used to steal our assets. I've missed a slide here. Don't ask me why not. But okay, I've lost a slide. It's not important. I made the point. The point is the private use of issuance of money is being used for corruption. It's being used to steal the nation's wealth, our own wealth, and it's being used to buy out the world's resources, okay, for a global elite. And the other important thing about the Bank of England, oh, yeah, a letter was written to the government asking why they don't control the issuance of money, and the answer came back was, we want to keep the money supply separate from the fiscal policy. So money policy is separate from fiscal policy, which is, of course, lunacy. It's complete lunacy, isn't it? I say that's the economic equivalent of our military commanders not having control of our weapons. It is lunacy. So it's a bit like, okay, well, you're the military commander and you've got these tanks. Oh, yes, where do you keep the shells? Oh, someone else has got the shells. Okay, so when the government turns around and says, we want to keep fiscal policy separate from monetary policy, they're a bit loopy. And just so you understand, fiscal policy is about the tax and how money is spent. Monetary policy is how much money is created and by who. All right, so what's the problem? The problem is that the private issuance of bank is promulgating corruption. Right? It is the money supply itself that is causing needless poverty, but also increases the excessive wealth of the minority. And it's both corrupt and it's also fraudulent. Mervyn King, as the governor of the Bank of England, said, of all the many ways of organising banking, the worst is the one we have today. Governor of the Bank of England. I asked the question, why are we using the worst banking system? He didn't say it's not the best, he said it's the worst. So why are we using the worst banking system? And the answer, of course, is it may be the worst for you and me, but it's the best for the bankers. So we have a situation where the government itself is permitting the banks to use the worst banking system. So who are the government working for? The bankers. All right, what's the fraud? Let's get down to the issue. What is the fraud? When you take out a mortgage, you create a promissory note. It may not say promissory note on the document, but it's implied, right, the format of the promissory note, against which the banks, quite rightly, create new money by way of credit, and they put it into your bank account so you can buy a home. So that process is quite legitimate. This is the Bill of Exchange Act of 1882. Excuse me. A promissory note defined. A promissory note is an unconditional promise in writing made by one person, you, to another, the bank, signed by the maker, engaging to pay on demand or at a fixed or determinable future time a sum certain in money to or to the order of a specified person, the bank. That's what a promissory note is. That's from the Bill of Exchange Act of 1882. So it's recognized legislation. So the point about this is that the banks aren't actually doing anything wrong when they create money out of nothing. And there's nothing wrong with that either. And this is a mistake a lot of people make. Because it's there for our benefit. The problem is the benefit has been taken away from us, because what the banks are doing, of course, is they are attaching their own little slice of cake to that, aren't they? And it's not their money. When we sign that form, we are the maker. And if I make something, who owns it? I do. And so what you have to get into your mind is this concept, is that you are getting the benefit of money today, which you will lose the benefit of tomorrow. So you are borrowing from the future, right? So that's a very important concept. Now, when you look at the documentation, there is only one signature on the document, and it's your signature. And what you're actually doing is you're providing evidence to yourself. If you suffer from Alzheimer's in 20 or 30 years' time, you'll say, I don't remember borrowing that money. Somebody can turn around and say, there's your signature. Oh, okay. So it's a very, very important thing to understand that that signature on that document, you are the creator of the money, it's your money. It's your money, and the banks have no right whatsoever to charge you interest. They could rightly charge you a fee for acting as the facilitator. Lord Denning stated in 1969, we have repeatedly said that a bill of exchange or a promissory note is to be treated as cash. It is to be honoured unless there is some good reason to the contrary. So when you go into the bank with your promissory note, with your signature, the bank has an obligation to actually give you the money, which they do. And the only good reason that the banks could say, we're not going to do this for you, is if you had an intent not to pay them back, or it was patently obvious that you couldn't pay them back. Okay? So there is a very important point. So the actual system is working at the moment up to the point where the banks are doing what they're supposed to do in accordance with legislation, which is give you the money against the promissory note. The scam is the interest. All right, now it's very difficult for some people to get to grips with the idea of creating money out of nothing. So I have this island analogy which I like to use. And I think what happens is people go away and they have a clearer understanding and they can explain it to people. If you try and explain to people that we make money just by signing a document, they won't gather it. So I want you to imagine there's a group of 1,000 people, and we've had enough of Cameron and his cohorts, and we've actually sailed to the South Pacific in search of a new land. And we discover this island in a lovely sunny day, and we drop anchor, we go to the shore, and the first thing we do is we do a recce. We set up groups of people all around the island to see what we've got. At the end of the day, the people come back, and lo and behold, we've arrived at paradise. We've found everything we could conceivably want. There's forests that we can cut down logs and build houses. The soil is rich. There's water, fresh water flowing from the hills. There's gas bubbling in the water so we can get a gas supply. There's minerals in the soil and so on and so forth. It's absolute paradise. So what we do is we organize ourselves in groups. People want to cut down the woods. Some people want to build the houses. Some people are going to look after the children and so on and so forth. And our society will prosper on the basis that we have all the resources and we've got the wealth. The real wealth is us. Because we are the people that will harvest the resources. And we could work a 3-day week or whatever. The point is we all have to make a fair contribution to the running of our society. Now, most important about this island and about the resources and about the people is that we only actually extract what we need to live our lives and have happy lives. What's also important about our island is there's no money. Okay? And when you actually get to understanding the concept that money is actually a modern concept in real terms, it starts to make sense. But human beings being human beings, what we have is we have some people who start slacking. They start to go to the north side of the island, they go on the beach not working. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, they come back and expect to eat their food and get everything that everyone else has got, and yet they've not made a fair contribution. Now, you imagine on our island that we will have administrators, because it's a sensible thing to have somebody doing the things that all of us don't want to do. And these administrators we may call government. They would come together and they would say, right, well, what are we going to do about these skivers? How can we control them? What can we do? And somebody could come up with an idea, well, why don't we have a voucher system? Which is that once you've done your day's work, somebody will give you the vouchers to prove you've worked. And then you could use those vouchers to go and get your resources, be it food or whatever. So they would instigate a voucher system, which is, of course, money. And because we're respectful of the sovereign, we will call our money sovereignties. So the committee or the government, whatever you want to call it, would say, okay, we're going to now issue 1,000 sovereignties to everybody on the island. And they would give them 1,000 sovereignties. Nothing wrong with that. Logical. So everyone has 1,000 sovereignties. And the people who go on the north side of the island, okay, and are sunbathing, not working, won't get their sovereignties, and they won't be able to buy food. So we'll be able to identify the slackers. So, okay, so life goes on. We've got our 1,000 sovereignties. We've worked out now that everything must have a value. And what we've done is we've created an economy. Okay, so we've got our first economy. We understand how it works. You work, you get paid, you use that to buy the goods that you require. And our economy booms because we have a requirement for about 1,000 sovereignties worth of goodies a month, and we earn them each month, and life is happy and life is good. Now, over the next 10 years, our island expands, and we find that we've now got, well, maybe 100 years, we now find that we've got 10,000 people on the island. But all of a sudden, the economy's gone poor. It's gone bad on us. We don't understand why. Because there's not enough money in circulation anymore. Because there was only 1,000 for 1,000 people, and yet it cost 1,000 for people to actually buy the goods and services they need. So the problem we've got, the committee are sitting around and saying, well, we don't understand it. Many, many years ago, we had a fantastic economy. What's gone wrong? And somebody would say, well, maybe we need austerity. Maybe we need to make people redundant, right? Mr. Osborne, this is exactly what's going on at the moment. He's claiming there's insufficient money, therefore we need austerity. But some bright spark would turn around and say, well, hang on a minute. When we first started our island, we issued 1,000 sovereignties to everybody, and everything was good, and everybody was prosperous. Why don't we just issue 1,000 more sovereignties to all the new people? And that's what you would do. And as soon as you issued new money to everybody, equally and fairly, the economy would boom again. Everybody would have jobs, everybody would have access to the resources, and we'd be happy again. Yeah? This is not difficult to understand, is it? But let's imagine, let's come back 100 years, and let's imagine that the committee sitting around trying to resolve this problem haven't come up with a voucher solution, don't understand the solution, and they're pondering, and then all of a sudden, they see at the distant horizon a ship, and the ship sails towards them. They say, wonder who this is. And the ship drops anchor, and there's a little rowing boat that starts to row towards the island. And in the rowing boat are a whole pile of people with hats on like this. And what do you think they are? They're the bankers, okay. And the bankers meet with the committee and they have a cup of tea. And the committee say to the bankers, well, we've got a bit of a problem at the moment because, you know, we've got these people who aren't actually working, doing their fair share. And the bankers would say, well, we have a solution for you. Oh, that's good. What's the solution? Well, we have money. And money is very valuable. And we can actually lend you this money. And what we can do is we can give 1,000 sovereignties, or in their case it would be pounds. We give £1,000 to every one of the islanders. But you must sign a promise to pay. Yeah. Now, the islanders haven't twigged that it's actually their own money. And the bankers are convincing them, lying through their teeth, that what's going on here is the bankers have got something that we don't have, the people don't have. So they lend each of the islanders £1,000, and the islanders duly go about their business as they would do normally. And the bankers say there's just one condition, of course, because it's our money, right? there's a 10% charge. And the islanders, knowing no better, say, well, okay, that's fine. So life goes on as normal. The end of the year, the bankers come back and they say, we'd like our money back now, thank you very much. So the islanders say, fine. So they collect all the money together, they put it in a big box, and the bankers count it up and say, right, £1 million, that's good, thank you very much indeed. Where's the 10%? And of course the islanders look at each other and say, well, we don't have the 10% because you didn't create the 10%. So the bankers would say, well, I'll tell you what, we'll make it and we'll lend it to you so you can pay us back, which they duly do. So they put 1,100,000 into circulation, give it back to the islanders, and away we go for the next year. And the islanders haven't twigged yet, because of course the islanders have to pay 10% on the 100,000 as well. And the next year the banks come back and they say, right, now we want our £1 million back, plus the £200,000, plus the 10,000 on top of the 100,000, and you know where this goes, don't you? I'll remove my banker's hat. So the point is that the islanders don't realize what's going on, and then the banks say, well, you know, we're going to do it another year, and of course it's 1,300,000 and another 20,000. And this time the bankers say, we're a bit nervous about you guys because we keep having to increase the debt of your island. We think your island is worth about £5 million. So we're going to take your island as security for the debt. And the islanders, knowing no better, give them their island as security. And it goes on and on and on for several years. And eventually the islanders go back at the beginning and say, okay, we'd like to borrow the money again. And this time the banker says, no, we're not going to lend you this time. We're going to foreclose. And the bankers steal the property. That is exactly what's happening today. That's what's happening all over the world because of the banking system. It is a fraud. Because the islanders simply did not realize, did not appreciate that the money belongs to them. It's our money, it doesn't belong to the bankers. We have been hoodwinked into thinking the bankers are the people creating the money. All right, so let's go back to the promissory note, the circumstances. Oh, by the way, before I forget, on our island, if the bankers were to actually persuade a few people, give them extra money to buy the water supply, the gas supply, the electricity supply, what do you think we tell them to do? Precisely, row off. So the lunacy is that we have actually sold off our natural resources to the bankers. Right, let's come back to the promissory note. At the same time you get a mortgage, the actual documentation creates what's called a legal deed. Now, this gives them the proprietary right to sell your property if you do not pay your mortgage. So you have two documents in one. One is the promissory note, the other one is a legal deed. And of course, the thing about a promissory note, the most important thing about a promissory note, there is an obligation on you to pay it back. And it is quite correct and proper that there is some security put in place to actually secure that debt. And that's the point about the mortgage deed, at least the legal deed. But this legal deed has been actually gained by a fraud, because the fraud has been that the banks are trying to persuade you that the bank is lending you its money. It's not. Now, it's a warning here. Negation of the right to sell your property. I argue that the key thing with the bankers at the moment is that we can claim that they gained that document by fraud, and therefore they do not have the right to claim our property back. But the warning I give is there is still an obligation to pay back the capital. In the same way as an island scenario, we all have responsibilities that we can put as much money into circulation as we want, providing we have a mechanism to bring it back out again. So in, out, etc. So the fraud is that the banks claim they have lent their money. And that's implied. If you look at any document, we are lending you money. Fraud Act of 2006 states quite clearly, a person is guilty of fraud if he is in breach of any of the sections follows, and those sections are fraud by false representation or fraud by failing to disclose information. Did the banks tell us that they were actually facilitating our own money? No, they didn't. It's an outright and unquestionable fraud. So, in my correspondence, I've been writing to quite a few banks on the basis of my knowledge, and it's got quite interesting because they don't tend to reply. But the question, I'm going to explain my sister's case a little bit, because that is quite fascinating. My sister got out an interest-only loan about 10 years ago. She'd just been paying interest because she couldn't afford to pay interest and capital. She was on Montserrat. Montserrat volcano blew up and she lost everything, so her circumstances weren't very good. She nevertheless got a mortgage interest only, and she was paying off the bank. And it came up for renewal, and the bank said, you've been paying us £650 a month, now I'd like you to pay £2,000 a month. And she said, I can't pay £2,000. And they said, well, we'll foreclose. So she came to see me. And I said, all right, well, I'll write the bank a letter. I wrote the bank a letter with certain information inside it, and they immediately came back and said, yes, we're being too harsh. And she said, bloody hell, she said, I've been doing this 6 months and they ignore me. You write one letter, and they immediately backed down. So they said, well, you know, we're prepared to accept £1,000 a month. And I said, well, actually, it's not as easy as that, because if you'll see in the letter, you haven't answered the key question. And the key question is about clarity. I've been in touch with the Financial Control Authority and the Ombudsman, and they assure me that if there's anything my sister's not clear about, you have an obligation to explain it. And I would like to explain this to my sister, whether you are claiming you've lent her money or issued or facilitated credit. Which is it? And they won't answer that question. And the question went off to the local bank manager, and he didn't reply. And 6 weeks later, I said, right, ring the bank, get an appointment. So we went in to see the bank manager. Okay? And I said to my sister, you just take note of what goes on. So we sat down and we spoke to the bank manager, and he waffled. He waffled. And my sister told me afterwards his leg was shaking under the table. Yeah. And I just sat there patiently listening to it. And he said, well, we've got to work out how we can repay this within the normal framework of banking. And I said, no, you're going to have to find out how this happens outside the normal framework of banking, because you've lied to my sister. Yeah. And the bottom line, I said, what you've got to do is you've got to take every single penny that my sister has paid the bank in the last 10 years in interest and convert it into capital. You then deduct that from the full capital value and come up with a new value, and then my sister will pay off the balance, the capital balance, over as long as she needs to take. And he said, I'll come back to you on that one. And he resigned from the bank. And then we heard no more. We heard no more. So we're obviously interested. What happened is it was passed to the senior manager, the area manager, who just ignored it. He didn't want to answer the question. And it eventually went back to collections again. So it went down the full circle. And the collections wrote saying, could you tell us what's happening? And we said, well, we're still waiting for an answer from the bank. And the girl was incredulous. Now, the lady involved was a lovely lady, and you know, a nice person who just didn't understand what was going on. And I sort of said, well, I need to know who's going to take responsibility for answering this question. And she said, oh, well, the area manager will. So I spoke to the area manager, and I said, right, I have been told by this lady that you're going to answer my question. And he said, not me. He said, she'll answer the question. I said, right, are you sure? And of course, what happened then was, I then wrote to the lady saying, he said that you are taking full responsibility for answering the question. That's fine, as long as I know there is somebody taking responsibility. And I would like you to tell me, are you claiming that you have lent my sister money, or are you claiming you facilitated credit? Which is it? Because in the past, they fudge it, right? They like us to think it's one and the same thing, and it's not. It's fundamentally different. What's the difference? Lending. If you have £500 in your bank account and you lend it to a friend, your account goes from 500 down to 0. His bank account goes from 0 up to 500. So the money is already in circulation, and it transfers from one pool to another pool, straightforward. With a facility, credit, the money does not exist to start with. The money is created out of nothing. I think most of us in this room probably understand that. But the point is, what we need to understand is the subtle difference. And we need to hone in on the bank who are deliberately misleading us on this issue, right? They're trying to pretend that they've got the money and they haven't. And as we all know in this room, we are the makers of the money by virtue of the promissory note according to legislation. It's chalk and cheese. Banks do not lend depositors money, right? They create deposits. So when you get a loan, it creates a deposit. Now, we've been saying this for many, many years now, and there's been a general wall of silence from the banks and everyone else. But I tell you what, the work that we've been doing, all around the world, people having to go, we forced the Bank of England to confess. Right, so what does the Bank of England actually say about this?
Ryland, your article was about how money gets
Can you hear that? Can we turn the volume up?
created. We're surrounded here by gold in the vaults of the Bank of England, and historically in the gold standards, the amount of gold would have been related to the stock of money in the economy. Things are very different now. In the modern economy, where does money come from?
Well, let's start off with narrow or central bank money. As the name suggests, central bank money is determined by the Bank of England and consists of notes and reserves. And in normal times at least, notes and reserves are determined by the amount of notes that people want to hold or need for their transactions, and the amount of notes and reserves that banks want to hold, given the level of interest rates in the economy. It is not chosen or fixed by the central bank, as is sometimes described in some economics textbooks.
It's not fixed by the Bank of England.
Your article focuses on broad money. What determines how much of that there is?
Well, broad money, which in many ways is a better measure of the amount of money circulating in the economy, includes all the bank deposits of households and companies. And one of the key points of the article is that banks create additional broad money whenever they make a loan.
Banks create money whenever they make a loan. Okay, so the Bank of England is now coming out and, if you like, confirming what we've been saying for very, very many years, is that the money is created against the loans.
Now, while this is nothing new, it is sometimes overlooked as the main way in which money is created.
The main way in which money is created, and in fact, the main way is 97% of money is created by debt. So the more money we borrow, the more there is in circulation. And I think we can basically understand that. So the simple principle is that we have a debt-based economy because all the money that's in circulation has been created through debts. There is another way of doing that, of course, and it's the way we've done on the island. We created money out of nothing and we gave it to the people. And we had a happy and prosperous island. And the bottom line is that the amount of money you have in circulation is simply determined by how many people that you need and the jobs that you require. It's not difficult to understand. Okay, now I think I'll leave that. I can suggest that if you want to watch those videos, that's on the Bank of England website. If you go to, on the left-hand side, publications, and then that takes you to a page, and then there's the quarterly bulletin, and there are videos. Well worth watching. So it's bankofengland.co.uk. Right, so new money, which is created on the back of a promissory note, belongs to the creator, not the facilitator. The promissory note are to be treated as cash. That is the law, okay? That's Lord Derry. The bank, therefore, acts as an agent or a facilitator. Have you ever heard the expression, an overdraft facility? They're admitting it in their own documentation. So the point is the bank is not a lender. The bank cannot make money on its own account. That would be deemed as money laundering. Because if the bank could make money on its own account, i.e. without a promissory to pay, they would just do that. They wouldn't need to charge interest. They wouldn't need to lend money. They would just create and buy everything anyway. So the banks can't do it. The banks cannot create the money without our promissory note. It's our money. This is the point I make. The creator of the promissory note can claim without contradiction that they are the legitimate owner of the money. And this is what I've written to the bank. I've written to the bank on behalf of my sister, it's our money. It's my sister's money. She created it, not you. You couldn't make it without her. Okay? And the bank, of course, to date, have not replied. I'm looking forward to the reply. Do you think I'll get an answer? I don't think so. But it's always, and this is the important point, the banks are obliged to create money for you so you can buy a house, just like on the island, subject to one condition, and that condition is we must pay it back. When the bank states that they lend money, when in fact they are facilitating credit, they are actually making a false and deliberately misleading statement. It's not an accident. They know exactly what they're doing. They make a financial gain, and this is part of the Fraud Act. is if somebody makes a false statement from which they make a financial gain, it's fraud. It's unequivocal. This, therefore, justifies a claim for which we are now organising a class action lawsuit. We want as many people signed up to this class action lawsuit. There are 4 elements that we're looking at. These are the basic elements, but they certainly spread beyond this. Let's keep it simple for the moment. Question number 1, has the bank committed an offence under the law? Yes, they have. They basically not disclosed fully about the actual promissory note issue. Did the banks hide material facts? Yes, they did. They didn't give full disclosure. Has the bank benefited financially? Yes, they have. Is there a victim? Yes, there is. We are the victims. If the PPI scandal was estimated to be worth 40 billion, I can tell you that the claim against the banks for mortgages will be worth many, many trillions, because there's no time bar on fraud, which means we can look at mortgages against the banks for time immemorial. Wow. What a claim that's going to be. But just remember who the banks are working, who the government's working for, the bankers, yeah? So can we expect the government to step in with public interest? Yeah? I mean, we're going to need the banks, otherwise who's going to create the next bubble? And the point I'm making is, of course, that if we took a class action through the normal processes against the banks, the government would step in and they would cry public interest. We can't have the banks being wound up and bankrupt, can we? So we've got to be clever. We've got to box clever. If we accept that the present banking system is the problem, then the solution is an alternative banking system. And that's what we should be working on now. And I have been doing a lot of work in terms of creating an alternative system. I've written a document. I can make the document available to people. I will charge a small fee to keep me on the road. And if people want to contact me, I'll give you my email address. But the point is, we now have potentially an alternative monetary system which we can use, even in a small way. And the very, very simple purpose of that is twofold. Well, firstly, a better monetary system will benefit all of us. But also, secondly, it's the proof that an alternative is available, and therefore they can't claim the public interest issue, can they? We must close that one down. Now, the other important thing is this, that do we believe the judiciary know what's going on? Yes, we do. So we have the banks who are colluding with government and who are colluding with the judiciary. So the bottom line is that any action that we take would have to be via a grand jury. And remember at the very beginning of my presentation, the law of the land that was created by the people, we the people will decide whether the bankers are guilty or not. And when we find them guilty, we will seize their assets. Okay? So that's the job in hand. Preparation. The banks are not going to give up without a fight, are they? So we've got to justify our actions. Is our claim valid? Yes, our claim is valid, and we can prove it. It's irrefutable. The operation. Can we prove that we have an alternative working system? We've got to do that as well. We've got to create a lawful banking system that we can use so that we can actually demonstrate to people that the public interest argument is flawed. It's just a nonsense. And of course, we must also have a constitution. Any banking system that we're looking at must be written for the benefit of all the people. So it's not a commercial enterprise in the sense that it's a group offering a banking service to other people. It's a banking service that's written with a constitution attached. All right, work in progress. Let me tell you where I am with my sister, which is, you know, it is funny, it's hilarious and all the rest of it, but it's also very, very serious. Of the letters I've written to various banks, I wrote to, on behalf of somebody, to Santander, and they always respond through their solicitors. So we wrote to the solicitors and we said, we believe that your bank is involved in criminal activity and you have a duty of care to make sure that they're not. And the legal firm wrote back about 3 weeks later and they said they'd changed, they were putting our case into the hand of a new company, and it was a limited liability company. So we forced them to go and get some protection. So we are making a difference there. Okay, so in terms of the correspondence from banks, they never answer the questions. They obfuscate, they procrastinate, they do everything. I mean, what was it, 5 weeks from the last letter from my sister. Court appearances are an absolute joke. I've had one judge shout at me, "Did you get the money?" And I said, "You're asking the wrong question. The question is, did we get the money from them?" And we didn't. And they can't prove it. Case dismissed. Didn't happen like that, of course. The judge says, "I am satisfied," which means is another word for "I don't care," right? Found against us. I've had a judge say in the court, "We don't have to pay any attention to the Constitution." I said, "Well, that's you out the door straight away." I said, "There's a Queen's crest behind you. That's where you get your authority from. You've just dismissed your own authority. Bye." And this is what's going on. These people have got... These people have got so arrogant, and they've got arrogant because they're getting away with it, okay? So everything that we're doing now is making them change. Okay, my letter. This is what I'm going to do for my sister next week. I'm quite looking forward to the letter. The point is, this is a very brief and a very, very short version of it, but it's just to give you the gist, okay? Dear bank manager, please find enclosed a promissory note for the value of £100,000, being the capital balance without interest owing on my mortgage. Please use this promissory note to pay off my mortgage, the details of which are attached. Concurrently, please open a new account in my name so that I can pay down the promissory note from future earnings. That's the way it's designed. Please note that this will be done by way of a monthly payment of not £650, but £350 per month until full settlement is made. My sister will be very happy with that arrangement. Please note that the promissory note is in accordance with the Bill of Exchange Act 1882, extant legislation. Please also note that the following appeal court ruling, and that's the quote of Denning's ruling. It would be appreciated if you make best efforts to expedite matters, as I am keen to pay down my mortgage debt as quickly as possible. Thanking you in anticipation. Signed, I've been shafted. I can't wait to get the reply to that letter. I would like everybody who's got a mortgage to write this letter to their banks. Remember, if the current banking system is the problem, then the new banking system is the solution, right? Problem, solution. It's not that difficult to understand. And basically, we have the power to do this. There's my email address, rogerhayes.bcg. That's the best one to get me on, because my other one, it's just completely overloaded. Thank you very much indeed.
Hi, Roger, I know you from many years ago. Just not mention fractional reserve lending. Can you do that? Okay.
The fractional reserve banking is the creation of money based on a deposit of an amount of money. There's nothing wrong with creating money from nothing. It's provided equally to all of us and fairly, okay? There's nothing wrong in creating money. So this business about fractional reserve banking is only wrong if A, it's being misused, which it is, and B, if interest is attached. So we need to distinguish between fractional reserve that's used for our benefit and fractional reserve that's used for the banking benefit, okay?
How about if you've paid all your mortgage off?
You have a claim. You have a claim. And just make the point that fractional reserve banking is, if you put £100 into the bank, the bank against that deposit create £1,000. That's what fractional reserve banking is. And in fact, it's not 10 to 1, it's probably more like 1,000 to 1. Sir?
My daughter's fixed mortgage comes up for review at the end of this year.
Yeah.
She wants to go for a new mortgage, but also remortgage in order to do some investment and refurbishment on the property. What do you suggest she does?
Okay, this is an interesting one, because if your daughter goes into the bank and tells them what she will now know, right, they're just not give her the money. So I think we've got to work in the real world, which is possibly existing system as it is, play the game, pay your mortgage. I'm not suggesting to anybody that they do not pay their mortgage, right, because that will bring them strife. What I'm suggesting that they do is write to the bank and offer the promissory note. Pay your mortgage, I'm paying this mortgage, but I've sent you a promissory note, I would like you to make this arrangement. So what that does, it keeps you out of trouble, but also it still maintains the claim against the banks, okay? So
we're just going to have these three.
My question may have been answered, but while this is the shenanigans is going on, what is your sister paying per month?
nothing.
Does that not put you in a weaker position?
In her case, what I've done is I've said, we want to pay this money. Would you please open a bank account? Could you do it immediately? Because we're panicking. We want to give you the money, but we're not clear about our responsibility. The banks won't answer the question, and that's why they're not taking any action. And what I've said to my sister is, make sure you're putting money away in preparation. So we're being a little bit more bold because I'm the guy that's writing the letters, and I've said, we want to pay you, we want to pay you, we want to pay you. And of course, we couldn't be taken to court, the banks saying, well, you refuse to pay, because all my correspondence says, we want to pay you. So, that would defeat their argument, yeah?
Why do banks go out of business and reportedly struggle? I don't understand. Because they take the money that they're earning and they pay it out to themselves. They just steal it from the companies, right? So the whole thing about the banking is that they are creating money and they are divvying it amongst themselves. Their overheads, they're spending it all. They're just spending it all, and they give traders millions and millions of pounds. Yeah, and they're just giving it away. Yeah, exactly. They don't care because they get bailed out every time.
Do your comments apply equally to building societies?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Roger, for that blast of common sense. It just goes to show